You're listening to Artistic Finance, show 138. On today's show, I chat with Paul Tazewell, the costume designer of Hamilton and the 2021 remake of West Side Story. We discuss the upcoming Wicked movie, how Broadway costume designers get paid, how designers get paid when a show transfers, and how costume designers for films and movies get paid. We also talk about learning how to communicate about budgets, advocating for yourself by letting an agent do it, and figuring out what you want out of life and deciding how you want your career in the entertainment field to work out, whether that be working in academia, freelancing, or full-time work. Without further ado, let's get to the show.
You're listening to Artistic Finance Podcast, where your host, Ethan Steimel, interviews successful artists, leaders, and investors to help educate and inspire artists to grow their wealth.
Welcome and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ethan Steimel, and today I welcome costume designer Paul Tazewell to the show. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you, Ethan. It's great to be here.
We're recording this on February 26, 2023, and the Broadway news right now is that the Jonas Brothers are going to play a 5-night residency on Broadway. Oh, yeah.
I don't want to miss it.
And then also neo-Nazis are protesting outside of Parade. Yeah. So that's what's happening. Paul, you're not in New York right now. Where are you, and is there any news that you're tracking?
I am, I through Instagram, mostly I track all the Broadway biz info, but I'm actually working on a film of Wicked, the musical, and we're filming here in London. John Chu is directing it, and it's all very exciting. It's starring Cynthia Erivo and Ariana Grande, and then we also have Michelle Yeoh and Jeff Goldblum.
I see. So you're busy. You're like, I don't have time to track this news.
Yeah, right. No, that is kind of the case, but I do get little blips and spurts.
Amazing. All right, I've never worked on a film. I'm just curious. You're working on it right now. When is it going to come out?
I believe that it's 24. I don't know when they actually announced when it will be released, but I think it's gonna take at least that amount of time post work that will happen. And it's a beautiful, exciting, venture. It's really, really, really quite wonderful. But there are a lot of different elements that we have to, manage. So it's all good.
Let's get to know you a little bit, Paul. I suspect that most of the people listening to this actually know who you are, but just for those stragglers who don't know, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I mean, I've been designing costumes professionally for the last, I guess, almost 30 years, somewhere around 30 years. I went to school at North Carolina School of the Arts. Then I went for undergrad, and then I went to graduate school at New York Tisch School of the Arts, New York University Tisch School of the Arts. I designed, my first Broadway show was Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk, with Savion Glover, and it was directed by George C. Wolfe. I also did the original production of In the Heights, that was directed by Tommy Kail and written by Lin-Manuel Miranda. And then after that, I designed Hamilton, that was also directed by Tommy Kail. And obviously Lin-Manuel Miranda had a little bit to do with it. And then I designed the film of West Side Story that Steven Spielberg, where he reimagined the film of West Side Story. So those are a few of the things that I've done.
Yeah, amazing. Those are like 4 huge things. And what I love about that is like Bring Into Noise, Bring Into Funk was a huge show for your first one on Broadway.
It really was. And it was a completely different time. I mean, I want to say it was 96. It was in the late 90s, 95 or 96.
96 on Internet Broadway Database.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Great. Good. I have it in my head. I've had the great fortune to work on a number of productions that have changed the world of how we do musical theater, how we see musicals, American musicals. Some really groundbreaking work and amazing, creative, talented people that I've worked with. I mean, it's really been quite wonderful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love to see it. All right, a couple icebreaker questions that I ask everybody on the show. First one, what is a live event that you'd like to experience as an audience member?
I mean, I love Broadway shows. I mean, I love seeing theater. I love any kind of live theater, definitely. I love concerts if I am into the singer. But I just went to the ABBA concert that's here. That's actually the digital ABBA concert.
I want to see it. I want to see it. Please say it was good.
It was really amazing. It was really technically amazing. I mean, it's all the music that we know and love, or if you're a big ABBA fan. I was kind of an ABBA fan until I went to see the concert, but then I kind of grew into more of an ABBA fan. But it was just it's technically pretty brilliant. What they've been able to do with these holograms, and how real it all looks. It's just amazing, and just what that then. I mean, it's pretty scary actually for our work. My work as a designer, what the potential is for moving forward as that develops. As a form of entertainment, because it's so real.
But I would also hope that as designers, it's like we have to start with something real. I mean, yes, AI can generate a lot. I would hope that for designers, it would be a good thing, because it's like, well, there's your costume, and therefore if it continues on in use, that you would somehow get paid for it still. That would be my hope.
You would hope that would be the case. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, yeah, and yes, there was a designer that designed the costumes for the ABBA concert, and then they were scanned and recreated digitally. So that was what they did for that. But with AI and with all the imagery that we're starting to see, and it's becoming really popular, it's just we'll see what happens. We'll see how things shift and change, and what of the live performance world continues to operate with it does now. So I mean, and theater, from when I started designing professionally, which was in 90 or 89, 90, how we do it has changed greatly. We're still making costumes and making them by hand, but just how time and money affects what we're able to do and how we tell stories, and all that's changed greatly.
And I would even just using Wicked film as an example, because that's 15 years after the Broadway version, and I'm sure it's going to be sort of like completely different from that version. But I imagine that like the costumes, this is going to sound weird of me to say, and maybe I'm saying it wrong and crassly, but it's like they're going to be more like toys almost. Like they can be much more complicated and built differently, I think, maybe.
It's a different designer, obviously, that's designing. Susan Hilferty designed the original Broadway show, and I'm designing the film. So the sensibility is slightly different. I think that what we have been about as we've developed it is just, it's like, how do you make this a plausible world? There's always going to be an element of theatricality, within a musical, because of the genre that it is. But it's just how to hold to all of the elements that Wicked is, and synthesize it into something that is original.
All right, so you went to the ABBA concert. So I thought you were joking earlier, maybe, about the Jonas Brothers on Broadway. You want to go see that?
No. Would I go see that? I would. I mean, I don't know that I would go see that. I was never. I think the Jonas Brothers. That was after my time. So you can't blame me for. I'm just like, that's not something I'm going to be running to get tickets to. But it's like if somebody invited me, I would go.
I think it's one of those funny things of like, oh, what's on Broadway now? The Jonas Brothers. What? What do they think of next? Okay, next icebreaker question, which is, are you good or bad with money?
Oh gosh, I hope I'm good. I'm better than I was. I've matured with money, but I tend to be pretty careful, pretty conservative with how I spend my money. Although I also know that it's like you can't take it with you. It's, you need to live a joyful life, and if spending money is part of that, then you make a choice to do that. Being an artist or a designer and working in this business, you grapple with the challenges of money on multiple levels. to do the work. It's how much money do you have in your budget to be able to accomplish what you want to create, and what you're being asked to create, and in the way that you're being asked to create, and with the amount of time that you're given to create it. All of that is defined by the amount of money that you have, or much of it is defined by the amount of money that you have, because money then means number of people that you can have on your team to be able to manifest whatever it is. And by team, I mean shops and builders and assistants and cobblers and just all of it. So that all has to be taken into consideration. On a personal level, then you're talking about, well, how much am I getting paid to do this job, to design this one production? Since I graduated, pretty much been working freelance, except for when I was working for Carnegie Mellon University and I was teaching there. But all of my design work has been, for the most part, it's been freelance, and job to job. So you're always managing the amount that you can make for a project and how long it's going to take you to do that work. And usually those two things don't align. If you're talking about a living wage in New York City, it can definitely be a struggle, especially when you're younger, because the shows are fewer and fewer, or you're getting paid less, much less to do, say, an off-Broadway show or a show at the public than you are to do a Broadway show. And then, you're balancing that with shows that are out of town, that are away from home. So you're flying to other regional theaters, which I've spent a lot of time from the beginning of my career doing shows in other cities, because they'll pay, but they pay less. And I wouldn't say less than an off-Broadway show. They're probably commensurate with that, but they definitely pay less than a Broadway show. It's a huge challenge because there's no consistency, and this is about the personal money. This is about what I make as a designer versus, not the budget money. The budget money is, I don't know that it's solved, but it is managed by how you talk about what you do, how you communicate to the producers to create X. This is the amount of money that we need to have in the budget. Those conversations, that's something that's learned. And oftentimes it's learned on your feet. It's not, it's not something that's necessarily taught in schools. So you're figuring it out, or I did at least. I was figuring it out as I went, how to use my words so that it made sense for producers in understanding what they will get and what they won't get if they're providing less or more for a design. As far as income, for me, it was never the same, or it's never the same, because it's not like being working in an office where your salary is always coming in and you can kind of base what you're making according to how you're going to live. Because you're working freelance, you're always taking on, it's the fear that you're not going to get another job, or you don't know when the next job is going to come. So you're taking on everything that you can possibly fit into your schedule so that you can bank money in the event that you don't get asked to do the next project for a period of time or ever. There are a lot of loose strings that have to get tied together in order to manage finances for a designer. And I would imagine for an actor as well, and anyone else that's working in theater. It took me it's taken me the greater part of my career to get to a place where I feel like I'm in control of what my finances are. Part of that was because there's, this little show called Hamilton that came into my life, and it created a financial cushion so that I could make choices about what I was going to design and what I wasn't going to design, because it wasn't so much defined by, I need to make X number of dollars to pay my rent. It gave me some creative flexibility, choosing what I really want to do and what I don't want to do, or just having a bit of time. And having time, in that, it's having time to be able to effectively manage my money.
Paul, that was an amazing answer. because you covered everything. And that's a common thread we've had on the show, which is like, very often I'm very good with budgets and show budgets and things like that. And then personal finances, well, that's a little different, exactly for a lot of the reasons that you just mentioned. One interesting thing about that was that you had a steady paycheck as a teacher at Carnegie Mellon. How long did you do that? Where along your career did you do that? And then what's crazy to me is that you're now freelancing and not having that steady paycheck anymore. So what made you stop teaching?
I started teaching in 2003. 2003. It was 2003 to 2006. And it was at a period of my life when I was freelancing, and it seemed like I was taking on so many different projects to be able to manage my life financially that there was no space for life in general. And I always had in my head that somewhere down the line, because it was kind of, looking at other designers that, were maturing, and, how they, what their trajectory was for designing. Some of them made the choice to then take on jobs at universities and to teach design, to teach what they actually, love to do. And this position opened up. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is my time to do this, because I also wanted to, it was very important to me to work with an institution, work with students that were of a certain level that really wanted to be professional designers, because that is the group that I can really make the most difference, I felt, as far as, training them to do what it is that I do. When I took on the position of associate professor along with Susan Su, who is still there at Carnegie Mellon, I was very, very happy to be on faculty there. I moved myself basically. I ended up buying a house in Pittsburgh, and my life was going to be about being a professor, because designing just didn't seem to be, I wasn't doing as much on Broadway, and, it just didn't seem to be opening up the way that I had hoped. Just as I did that, as fate would have it, I think somewhere in there I did Caroline or Change. And then I was asked to do a film for HBO that George C. Wolfe was directing as well. So then things started to blossom, and that somewhere in there as well, The Color Purple was happening. So there a lot of things that were starting to open up in New York and in LA.
And the Color Purple was a big show. Like, it ran for several years.
Yeah.
That's a big one to have in there while you're teaching.
Yeah. And that was, that's what happened, is that I was then trying to manage a full-time job at Carnegie Mellon and a full-time design career. It was, again, there was no space for me and life. I basically had this group of students that I was following from their first year in graduate school until they graduated. That wasn't the intention, but the second year I was able to actually see, because I was around more, just what my effect was when I was present more regularly. The first year I was in and out, first trying to manage a new position, what I really wanted to be as an instructor, the best way to teach this group of students. So there was a lot of figuring out that was happening in that first year. The second year, I knew better how I wanted to approach teaching. And I also felt more engaged with the students just because I had more time to do that. But then that third year, because of the work that I had done the previous year, and then also some of the projects that were coming up, I wasn't going to let go of being a professional costume designer. It took 6 hours to drive to Pittsburgh from New York. So the commute was pretty grueling to think about doing a drive that way. And then I was spending all of my income on flying back and forth, because I was designing Broadway shows or shows that were in New York. So all of that together collectively led me to make the decision that it's best for someone else to be the instructor for Carnegie Mellon, because I really believe that the instructor needs to be present. It's not going to happen as effectively, and students are paying too much to have an instructor that's not present. When it works is like an NYU where you can teach and work in the same city. Those positions just weren't open at that time. So, I was going after a position that was outside of New York, because that was the best position that I could find.
I selfishly asked about that because I've been in New York for 10 years freelancing. I've never done anything else, but I have a baby on the way. And so I've started applying for, thank you. I've started applying for teaching jobs, I was sort of like, well, okay, Paul did it for a while, but it sounds like you just kept freelancing throughout all of it, never stopping.
And that was the thing with institutions, and I think that it's smart. They want for their instructors to continue to work. I think it is pretty imperative to have your finger on the pulse of what's going on, because you're teaching young creative people, and so you should be teaching from the point of view of what's coming up, what they're going to walk into. It's just whether you can create that balance with work. The way that I teach was most useful for me to be present, and to be more hands-on, and some of that is defined by the group of students that were entered into that program. Some of it is just about the work, like what it takes to get someone to understand the sculpture and shape of a dress, or the fitting of a suit or a uniform, or and what you need to look out for, and what it's not something that you can really do after. You need to be there and be with them, carrying them through that.
All right, so it wasn't, I was thinking maybe it was a financial decision of a life in Pittsburgh might be a little slower and easier and steady paycheck.
Well, that was there as well. It was a steady paycheck. It there were benefits, and insurance, and so all of that factored into that decision. Is my career and engagement with professional design went out when I was trying to weigh both. My love for costume design and designing show after show after show is where my heart is, versus becoming a career professor. And so I made the choice to go back to designing.
All right, so I want to talk really about two things with you today: budgets and the business of designing, sort of that stuff. And then the other part is more like the personal side of designing. So we've already touched on a little bit of both. Right now you're doing a film. You've done a film before. You've also done a lot of theater. You've also done theater that has then been filmed. And so I'm just curious about the finances of you getting paid as a designer, and maybe your costuming budgets, how they work differently when you're doing theater versus a film. So I guess the first question is, in theater, how do you get paid for, let's just say, a Broadway show, because that seems like easy enough for you since you have plenty of those under your belt. But like, how do you get paid as a designer for a Broadway show?
All of my contracts go through my agent, and so it's written up, all the specifics. The first specific will be, what is the fee, or it lists what the fee will be, and that's a number that has bumped up incrementally from one show to the next. I'm at a rate that's commensurate with the number of years that I've been working in the business. The other element of the fee, or what I make, is the royalty. So as long as the show runs on Broadway, my agent negotiates a certain percentage of royalty. They negotiate a weekly that I'll get as royalty, and then there's a certain percentage of the profit sharing that I will get if the show hits 1.5, or whatever, if it hits 100% or 1.5%, or whatever it might be, where all of the investors are paid back. And then that's when, over the life of the run of a show, I'll then make a certain percentage of the profit pool. The fee is paid up front. The royalty is then paid every week, and that's due to me every week, unless the producer, the show's not doing well, and then the producers come back to me and they say, would you agree to sign over your weekly, so that we can keep the show running. And then at that time as well, if they haven't worked out their investments, paying back all their investors, and the show making back its money, then I don't get any of the profit sharing. But if it does really well, if it's a hit, and we start to turn over more profit, then I'll start to make more money from the profit sharing. So that's for Broadway shows. My agent could actually talk much more eloquently about it, but that's that's basically how it played out. There are other terms that are part of, it might talk about travel. If I've got to travel a certain number of hours and the level of travel that I'll get, whether it's business class or premium economy or, whatever that might be. We might talk about it. It might list housing, kind of housing that I'm due. There are others, some other specifics that are listed in a union contract. It's all through USA, United States Artists, Local 829. The negotiation is, it's different because on some of the contracts that I've had, I'm quoted a fee that then relates to like a salary number or not, per week. Say on Wicked, I'm paid a certain amount per week, so that's my salary basically, and that's pretty much set. And so if you add all those weeks up over the amount of time that was agreed upon, that it ends up adding up to what they quoted me at the very beginning. There is no royalty. There is no profit sharing, at least for me. I don't know if there are other designers that are able to get that. I don't believe so. I think it's pretty rare that a designer, costume designer, or production designer is actually in that position. But I believe that there are other people that are made, like I think that say director or producers, there's some back end. And also, celebrity artists. There's a back end where they're making money on the film.
I know nothing about it, but I do watch movies and TV, and then I'll randomly see like an actor or even a costume designer. Randomly, I'll see them listed as a producer as well. And I always wonder, I wonder if that's because they were able to negotiate something.
I haven't hit that yet.
I don't know if it exists, but if it does, you will hit that soon. Manifesting, I don't know.
Yeah, thanks. I'm with you.
Taking a break from the interview to mention the Artistic Finance Patreon page. Now, this is where you can go to access early releases of episodes, our liability insurance document, our classroom homework assignment for students listening to an episode of their choosing, and other bonus content. Now, those items are actually not behind the Patreon paywall, but they are accessed via the Patreon page. Obviously, this show is free, as we want open access to this information. But if you do want to support the work I'm doing, you can join my 29 favorite people in the world and become a patron. Now here's one perk that we have coming up in the fall. I am working on a tribute to set and costume designer Tony Walton. We're going to be gathering in person with some of his Broadway design collaborators and his studio associates, and we'll talk about Tony's life and work. It will be turned into an episode of Artistic Finance, but patrons will be invited to attend the event in person. Or if you can't be there in person, you can get a Zoom invite. Earlier today, I had an hour-long meeting about it, and I'm very excited that Artistic Finance is getting the opportunity to produce and archive the event. So patrons, stay tuned for that. If any of this work sounds appealing to you and you want to support me as I do it, please sign up at patreon.com/artisticfinance. Now, one announcement that if you aren't a patron yet, at the end of March, the $3 a month tier is being retired, which means that after that, the entry-level tier is going to be $5 a month. So be aware that if you're wanting to join, that you have 10 days left before the $3 tier goes away. Anyone currently on that tier will be grandfathered in, but no new patrons can join on that level. That's it for the Patreon update. And now, back to the show. Let's say, I'm just making up numbers, but let's say for a film, they're like, okay, we're going to give you $100,000 to do the costumes. And then it's 10 weeks that you have to be working on it. So then you get a paycheck for $10,000 every week for those 10 weeks.
Exactly.
Costuming, you have to design before they build it. It's going to be spread out over a long amount of time. So I know in theater, if I'm an assistant, I'll get a certain amount each week and they'll say, okay, it's going to be 5 weeks. But the reality is I have to draft a light plot. I have to do all this other stuff, 2 months ahead of time. Obviously I work more than the amount of weeks. So I'm curious, with the weeks in the film, are you getting that weekly from the very first time you're starting to put a pencil to the paper to sketch something all the way to the end? Or how does that work out?
Well, it's agreed upon with the producer. First off, the line producer, who's kind of holding the purse strings, basically. You set a date that will be your start date, and then there's an expectation to say, okay, so I'm the studio's worker from this point until some midpoint or until the very end. Which is, what I've done before is that, it's like I start work, design phase, let's say, and then there might be an end point or a hiatus of being paid. And then we start pre-production, so when that date is set, then I start on pre-production, and then it goes then into production, and then on to wrap. And all that's negotiated hopefully prior to starting. Sometimes it's, you've got a certain amount of weeks that you negotiate, and then the full contract negotiation is still going on. You're hopefully agreeing to a period of time and an amount of money that works for you, because it'll inevitably affect what the overall negotiation will be. The way that a fee goes up, let's say is kind of referencing what your last fee was. It's always kind of looking back to, okay, well, you made this on that, and an agent will look to that to then be able to negotiate a higher fee for the next job.
You've mentioned that everything goes through your agent, and also everything is USA 829. When did you, well, I assume that everything you do now is through your agent and through USA 829. I assume there's nothing you do that's not.
Whether it's film or it is theater, it's all going through 829. It could go through the Costume Designers Guild. That is I don't go through that guild. I go through USA.
Got it. Talking about agents, so you've been working on Broadway since '96. At what point did you get an agent? Like, did you have an agent for that? Did you have an agent before that?
I'm trying to think of it. I had a lawyer first, and then I graduated to an agent. I went to an agency. I'm trying to think if my first Broadway show was with a lawyer. I think that it was, because I'm pretty sure that, because I had a friend who did an August Wilson straight out of college, straight out of Yale. He had a lawyer that he was using, an attorney, and then so he turned me on to that attorney, and so that attorney took me on as a client. Then somewhere in there, I shifted over to an agent that was actually the agent of a director that I was working with, and so pairing wise, she was negotiating the director's jobs, and when he asked to use me, then she would negotiate mine as well. And it was just kind of convenient. It was under William Morris. Then my agent shifted me over, or handed me over to another agent. That agent ended up leaving William Morris and going to another agency. So I've been with that agent for quite a while.
And so have you pretty much had a lawyer and an agent negotiating from like when you started designing?
On professional shows, either professional or Broadway shows, I've had either an attorney or I've had an agent that negotiates my fee. And that's because I'm not the best advocate for my time. I mean, I'm not the best representative for getting the most out of a producer. I mean, there's a different kind of language that you're using. I'm not assertive in that way when it comes to representing myself and my work and what that value is. I'm much better at it now. I can have a stronger conversation about it, but there are also certain things that I just don't want to have to manage, because I'm trying to manage a relationship with the producer that stays professional and clean and doesn't come with a lot of baggage, where I can look to them as someone that I can trust. If it's a contract negotiation situation, it shifts what that relationship is. And that's just for me. That's very specific to me. I know like Hal Binkley, he never had, I mean, he managed all of his own contract. I mean, he wasn't paying any, and that, that's the other part, is that I'm paying 10% for every contract and in perpetuity of that contract, so they still, that's the reason for an agency to exist, is that, they will get a cut of a certain contract until the end of a show's run. But for Hal was fine to not have that. He was able to manage that in a way that it wasn't the way that I best manage. It's different person to person.
Ken Billington also is the same way of like using a lawyer and negotiating it sort of himself, but more people than not have agents. And I think it's just for all the reasons you've said, it's simpler. They're going to put more time and effort into it, et cetera. And it leaves me over here to do my costuming thing. Amazing. So Broadway, there's a royalty situation, additional weekly compensation situation. Film, there's not that. What about when one of your projects gets filmed? I assume everyone is getting paid when they film that and then put it on Broadway HD or on Disney Plus. How does that work?
I'm not sure about Broadway HD, but with Disney Plus, yes. So that venue is renegotiated. It might be somehow reflective of what you originally made on the show, the production, as far as the fee, or it might be whatever the agent is able to negotiate. It just depends on what the structure is and what the agent is able to glean from other agents that are doing the same thing, and how it all comes together.
And I assume you have nothing to do with it necessarily, so you're not putting in additional work on that, or do you have to somehow modify things or anything like that?
With Hamilton, when it was filmed, we didn't know when it was going to be released, so Disney wasn't involved with it. So there wasn't really a full contract in place because it was done mid-year into the run. There was a certain amount of wear and tear that we were concerned about might show up on HD. So we rebuilt some of the costumes that needed just to have attention, just to make sure that it all looked as new as possible for the HD. And then that actually got shelved. I mean, or not shelved, but it was done, and then it was held in a vault until it was sold to Disney.
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't know that part of the story. The production itself just filmed it for themselves to then shop out.
Right. Unless somewhere, in some upper office, they were already talking to them. But as far as we knew, we knew that we were filming it to hold it as a piece, but we didn't really know how it was going to then be shared with the public.
Got it. Cool. Okay. And then just random question. So when you had to rebuild those, was that a separate fee that you got paid to go help rebuild, or was that just part of we're filming it and come back and do some work?
We're filming it and come back and do some more. Well, actually, largely it was my team, and they're the same team that had been on it from the very beginning. They're the same design team. So my associate and assistants have stuck with the show and continued to provide for the show. They oversaw all that, but then there were fittings that I needed to attend just to make sure that everything was done the way that I wanted for it to be done. Now, it's that I have the place or the right to ask to be paid a day rate for every time that I go in. And it's listed in my contract. There's a certain amount that is Paul Tazewell's day rate if he needs to go in for X number of hours or whatever. Sometimes I'm good about collecting all those, and sometimes I'm not. And that's just me and how much time I know that I'm not interested in just kind of drawing blood out of the producer. If it's a significant amount of time that it's going to go into recreating or creating something, then I might ask to be compensated for that. If I know that my associates and assistants are really going to have to oversee most of it, I'm more interested that they get paid what is due. And then I'll go in and be a supervisor and check and.
Awesome. Well, don't let your agent listen to this, because they'll probably email you and say, "Excuse me, have you been going and getting day rates that we could have had access to that we haven't been getting?"
Exactly.
Kidding, I'm kidding. All right, so then when a show transfers to another venue, or like Hamilton has all these tours out, how does that work? Do you have to... the design is there, but do you have to redesign for the new cast? Is it like a whole new show and a whole new fee? How do you get paid for those kind of transfers?
It's a whole new fee. It is a percentage of the Broadway fee, usually. It's not the full fee. It's usually a percentage of the fee. And also the weekly it bumps down from what the Broadway weekly is. The profit pool for every tour, it's the same, but I'm not exactly sure. I might be talking out of turn, but there are some similarities, and then there are things that are make it less. Where I'm making less on a tour than I am on a Broadway show.
Which makes sense to me just because, it seems logical that a tour might have less access to money or less. I mean, I guess it could play bigger venues sometimes, but there's so many extra costs of touring it.
Right. For every production of Hamilton, we build a new set of costumes specific to those actors that are in that company. It ends up being a lot of costumes because of the coverage, because we have standbys, swings and standbys, and people that know a whole track of Burr, and they know a whole track of Hamilton, and they know a whole track of Jefferson. And that same person travels with them, and anytime that one of those characters is out, then they go in. But that means that they have to have all of the costumes that Jefferson has, all the costumes that Burr has, and all the costumes that Hamilton has. So for every cover that we have that is going to take on any of those individual primary roles, they have to have a whole track of clothes. So all of those are newly made. What we do have now is a big stock of clothes that goes out for stopgap. So oftentimes the costumes might not be ready when a show is starting. So we'll have to put, we made great use of it when we were out for COVID, when there was a shutdown and then we came back. So there were a lot of people that their bodies had changed, or there were people that were making other decisions about their lives, so they weren't coming back. So new people were going in. But there just wasn't enough time built into when they announced that they were going to be going back on stage and being able to build new clothes for them. So we were building new clothes for them at the same time as we were fitting them in clothes that had been used before, but they needed to have costumes so that they could do the role until the new ones arrived.
Wow. So I just assumed when somebody was covering that they were just borrowing the costume from the other person.
No, you actually, there are some things that you might be able to use, like a cape, or, if it's not close to the body. But for the most part, through equity, you have to provide a new costume.
It makes total sense. Everybody's body is different, unless
that there is that. And then there's also just hygiene and just making sure that everything is clean.
Right. Yeah. I was only an actor when I was much younger, and hygiene didn't seem to be a thing at that point.
Yeah, no, that's it.
So I just assumed it was done like community theater was done. Amazing. So I've learned a lot about sort of the business of the costuming that I didn't know. We're sort of running out of time, but I want to just ask a couple like sort of personal finance designing questions. When you're getting a paycheck, is it just coming to you, Paul Tazewell, or do you have some sort of design studio or an LLC set up to sort of manage all of that?
I do have an LLC. It's Tazewell Costumes, because I'm set up as a business. Tax-wise, it's beneficial. It operates that way, and that's how I do operate as an entity. The check will come from the production, go to my agent. The agent pulls off their 10%, and then I get a check issued minus the 10%.
And the same for film. So it's all going to the agent, and then they're issuing it to your LLC.
Correct. And then I pay myself from the LLC.
I see. That makes sense. And just logistically, this doesn't matter, but are you like salaried from the LLC, or do you just take money as you need it? Do you just pay yourself 1099 income, or is it sort of like you're paying your taxes from the LLC?
Talking about managing money, I now have a financial planner, or like a business manager. So they monitor all that. So the checks actually go from my agent to my business manager, and then they're figuring exactly everything that you are asking, and which is just moving money into the different accounts that I have. One of those accounts happens to be my tax account, which a certain amount of every check that I make goes into my tax fund, so that at tax time I have enough money to pay on everything that I was paid over the year. So I'm not scrambling, or they're not scrambling to find the funds to then be able to, that it's debited off for every check that I make. It's debited off and it's put away.
That sounds very organized. And part of me is like, why should get someone's business manager on the show? But I feel like it would be such a dry episode.
No, no, I think it would be good to, yeah. I mean, it could be a short show. It could be a really short show, like a 15, a special.
Yeah, unless I'm like digging into things that they don't want me to know about, and it's like, oh my gosh, you haven't been paying Paul Tazewell his full share. I caught you.
Right, no, right, exactly.
Oh my gosh. Amazing. Is there anything about the career of designing or costume designing that we didn't touch on that maybe you want to talk about before we end?
For longevity, it's imperative for designers to figure out why they want to do this, because there is always going to be a certain amount of ups and downs or financially, and how it changes your life, how your priorities need to shift. And I think that it's very, very important, so that you can maintain sanity, to have a strong sense of your love for doing what you're doing, and what you get out of it. Because your time is always, it's always spent in ways that directly connect to your work. I mean, it's a very time consuming profession. When you compare it to something where you're able to make a salary, you're able to go into an office and do your work and go home and get paid. I think it's important to really know why you're doing it. Like, if I had made this, the decision to leave or to change, and there was a lot of beauty, there was a lot of incredible life that I would have missed if I wasn't still a freelance designer. If I wasn't still doing it the way that I learned to do it. And I think it's just being clear about what is your gift and how do you want to act on that, or give back, or whatever you want to call it. It's like it's imperative to figure that out, because it will then affect how you feel about money, how you feel about time, your time, how you value what you do, and how you spend your time as it relates to costumes, or as it relates to theater or film.
I love that. And also I relate to it because now, like, I'm switching into teaching. I can only see me being a better lighting designer going into teaching, because I feel like with 10 years of freelancing, I've done a little bit of that, just taking all the jobs, taking all this, and the art that I put out is not a high quality product because I've been so stretched thin. And I'm actually actively looking for a university that's away from New York, because I want to consciously only do shows that have the budget to sort of fly me back. My thought is I can only get better because I'm going to have to be pickier about what quality of show I do. That taps into what you just said about longevity, is like, know what you want to do, because you're going to have a lot of decisions that are going to affect that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this question is just for fun, and you don't have to have an answer to this, but is there any question that you would like to ask me?
When you were saying that you wanted to find a job outside of New York, so that they would have to fly you back in order to do the work, it's there are many. To say set yourself up is not the right term, but there are ways of creating your life that you think will mean that it will be the way you want for it to go. Inevitably, it's going to be something different. So I think it's just really important to stay as flexible as possible, because you never know what's going to come up. But as far it's like I am excited that you are out there doing the work that you're doing, and also talking, having these conversations. I think it's very, very important to be, for all designers to be talking about money, and not be afraid about talking about money, because it's about it will affect the work that you do and how you do it, and then it's also going to affect how you see yourself and how others see you, and it all makes for a very strong career in the end.
I mean, I certainly appreciate you being here and speaking so frankly about things. It is important to me to talk about it because people don't talk about it. I've had some wonderful people show up to talk about it, but I've also had a lot of people say, no, thank you. This is not something that I want to talk about in public, which I totally understand. I'm so thankful to everyone, including you. Before I let you go, where can people connect with you, and who do you want to connect with you?
Oh. I would say that probably my Instagram is the best way of connecting with me. it stays very professional. What I'm finding right now is that emails get lost very easily when you're, juggling multiple things. So it's probably a little more direct and clear, just as far as reaching out.
Got it. At Paul Tazewell on Instagram.
Yeah. I'm open and interested to, chat or, to connect with anyone that is interested in the world of theatrical and film costumes, or has a question around that, especially young designers that are just launching into this career, or trying to find their way, because I think that there are potentially a lot of pitfalls that can happen, in entering into the career, and so it's good to have somebody that you can reach out to.
So I just heard, if you're a young or early career costume designer, reach out to Paul on Instagram. That's what I heard.
Yes, that's good.
Amazing.
Good.
Paul, this was amazing. Thank you so much for giving me an hour of your busy schedule. Thank you.
Ethan, it was my pleasure. It was so good to talk to you. So glad that I could be a part of this.
That's it for this week's episode. My takeaways are: use an agent. They are trained in the language of contracts, and they can advocate very well for you. I didn't realize film designers didn't get paid royalties. I just assumed that many of the people working on movies got a percentage of the profits. Not so. They may be compensated well, but they don't get anything on the back end. Paul briefly mentioned learning about budgets and talking with producers is an on-the-job learned skill. That's important because with things like contracts and finances, people often blame the school system for not teaching it. However, school has to cover a lot of ground because there are so many jobs available in theater that contracts and wages are different depending on what you're doing. So, it isn't surprising that teachers can't cover all that material, and that's why Artistic Finance is here, for the specific people in the entertainment niche to find each other. Someone graduating in costuming could become a draper, a shop manager, a designer, a crew member, a teacher, a shopper, a wig maker, a puppet maker. The list goes on and on. But once you settle into it, what your career is going to be, that's when you can find someone in the artistic finance community who can answer questions or share experiences similar to yours. Those are my takeaways for this week. Did you enjoy the show? If so, please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. I'm still one review behind the Light Talk podcast in number of reviews, so I'd love for you to help me get one more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about today's episode. I'd also love to know what you thought of last week's episode with guest host Rob Schneider. He'll be back with another episode on Broadway's financial flops, so if you want to hear more about the Spider-Man musical, make sure you're subscribed. Now, coming up in April, we'll be having more guest host episodes, and I'll be very interested to hear what you think of those. A reminder that if anybody wants to become a patron and you want to join at the $3 level, that is expiring at the end of March. So if you want for $3 a month to get access to early releases, a private podcast feed, and an invite to our Tony Walton tribute recording, join up in the next 10 days. You can join up on our website, artisticfinance.com, or go straight to Patreon at patreon.com/artisticfinance. If you're wanting to attend our book club on Zoom, the next meeting is this Sunday, 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We're reading the Budgetnista's book, Get Good with Money. And also a reminder, you don't have to read the book in order to attend, but if you want to get good with money and get the details about the meetup, visit artisticfinance.com/book club. As always, there are links to everything we talk about in the show notes. That's it for today. Until next week, break a leg.
Thank you for listening to Artistic Finance. Make sure to subscribe. To access our show notes, transcripts, or resources, go to artisticfinance.com. This show is for entertainment purposes only. Before making any decision, consult a professional. This show is copyrighted by Artistic Finance. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting.